My parents sold my business because women can't run businesses. The signature page was still warm from the printer when I walked into my own office to find strangers dismantling my desk. 3 men in identical polo shirts were wrapping my computer equipment in bubble wrap, while a woman with a clipboard directed them like a conductor, orchestrating my professional funeral. I stood frozen in the doorway of Bloom Digital Marketing Agency, watching 5 years of 18-hour days being packed into cardboard boxes by people who didn't even know my name. "Excuse me," I managed to say, my voice barely cutting through the sound of packing tape being ripped from its roll. "What exactly is happening here?" The woman with the clipboard looked up, her expression shifting from efficiency to something resembling pity. "You must be Sarah. I'm Rebecca from TransitionPoint Business Services. We're here to facilitate the ownership transfer. Your father said you'd already been informed about the sale." The words hit me like ice water. Sale. Transfer. My father. I fumbled for my phone, scrolling through my messages with shaking fingers. Nothing. No missed calls, no texts, no emails about any sale. The last communication I'd had with Robert Chen was 3 days ago when he'd asked for my monthly revenue reports, claiming he wanted to, quote, see how his little girl was doing with her hobby business. "There has to be some mistake," I said, watching a stranger carefully place my client files into a box labeled, quote, confidential, new management. "This is my company. I built this from nothing. I own this business." Rebecca's smile was practiced, professional, and devastating. "According to our paperwork, Chen Holdings LLC is the registered owner, and they completed the sale to Martinez Consulting Group this morning. The transition is effective immediately." Chen Holdings. My father's umbrella company that I'd foolishly allowed him to create for me 3 years ago when I needed business insurance, and he'd convinced me it would be easier if he handled the legal structure. "It's just paperwork, Sarah," he'd said over dinner at the family home in Cedar Park. "You focus on the creative stuff, let Daddy handle the boring business details." I'd been so grateful for his support, so touched that he finally believed in what I was doing, that I'd signed everything he put in front of me without reading the fine print. Now I understood why he'd been so insistent about those monthly reports, why he'd started asking about my client contracts, why he'd seemed so interested in my revenue projections. He hadn't been proud, he'd been appraising. I called him immediately, my hands trembling as I pressed his contact. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail. His voice, warm and familiar, delivered the automated message that had comforted me through childhood's scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. Now it felt like a slap. "Dad, what is happening? There are people in my office saying you sold my business. Call me back right now." I hung up and immediately dialed my mother. Linda Chen answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful like she was discussing weekend dinner plans. "Oh, honey, you found out. Good. Your father was worried about how to tell you." "Tell me what, Mom? That he stole my company and sold it to strangers?" My voice cracked on the last word, years of suppressed frustration finally breaking through. "Stole is such an ugly word, Sarah. He saved it. That little marketing thing was never going to work long term. Women just don't have the instincts for real business. You're creative, sweetheart, but creativity doesn't pay mortgages." I sank into my desk chair, one of the few pieces of furniture the strangers hadn't claimed yet. Around me, 5 years of work disappeared into boxes. The vision board where I'd mapped my growth strategy. The framed screenshot of my first 5-figure month. The thank you cards from clients whose businesses I'd transformed through strategic social media campaigns. All of it reduced to inventory in a corporate acquisition I'd never consented to. "Besides," my mother continued, oblivious to my devastation, "Michael needs the money for his restaurant venture. Real businesses require real capital, and your brother actually has what it takes to succeed. This way, everyone wins. You can get a nice job working for someone else, and Michael can finally open that steakhouse he's been planning." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Michael, My younger brother, who'd never held a job for more than 6 months, who'd burned through 3 failed business attempts funded entirely by our parents, who still lived in their basement at 28 while I'd been supporting myself since college graduation. The same Michael who'd mocked my internet business at every family gathering, who'd told his friends I was playing pretend CEO while he waited for his next big break. The sale closed an hour ago, Mom said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Martinez Consulting offered 30% above market value. Your father was brilliant to take it. They specialize in turning around struggling agencies, so really, this is the best thing that could have happened to your little company. My little company. The agency that had grown from 0 to $300,000 in annual revenue. The business that employed 4 full-time contractors and served 26 active clients across Austin and beyond. The dream I'd sacrificed relationships, sleep, and social life to build from my kitchen table. You had no right, I whispered, but the line was already dead. Mom had hung up, probably to call Michael with the good news about his windfall. I sat in my violated office, surrounded by the systematic dismantling of everything I'd worked for, finally understanding that my family had never seen Bloom Digital as my success story. They'd seen it as their emergency fund, my worth measured only in how much money they could extract when they needed it. The woman with the clipboard approached my desk, her expression gentle but firm. I'm sorry, but we need to finish the pack-out today. The new owners are planning to rebrand and will need the space cleared by tomorrow morning. I nodded numbly, watching the last of my professional identity disappear into cardboard boxes. But as I sat there, something hardened inside me. Something that had been building through years of condescending comments, dismissive jokes, and casual cruelty disguised as family concern. They thought I was just the creative daughter, too naive to understand real business, too weak to fight back against their calculated betrayal. They thought wrong. I pulled out my laptop and started making a list. If my family wanted to play business hardball, they were about to discover they'd been underestimating the wrong person for far too long. The next morning, I drove to Martinez Consulting Group's headquarters in downtown Austin, determined to understand exactly what my family had orchestrated behind my back. The building was one of those sleek glass towers that screamed corporate success, the kind of place where deals were made in boardrooms overlooking the Colorado River. I'd researched Martinez Consulting until 3 a.m, learning everything I could about the company that now owned 5 years of my life. Carlos Martinez had built his empire by acquiring struggling agencies, stripping them for parts, and either flipping them for profit or absorbing their client lists into his existing operations. His track record was ruthlessly efficient. Buy low, eliminate redundancy, maximize value extraction. The online reviews from former agency owners told a consistent story of broken promises, gutted teams, and creative visions sacrificed for spreadsheet optimization. The receptionist directed me to the 15th floor, where I found myself face-to-face with the man who'd bought my future without ever meeting me. Carlos Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably mid-30s, with a kind of polished confidence that came from never having to fight for anything. His corner office showcased the Austin skyline like a trophy, and awards lined the walls celebrating his various business acquisitions. Sarah Chen, he said, standing to shake my hand with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. I was hoping we'd get a chance to meet. Your father speaks very highly of your creative talents. The way he emphasized creative made it clear he viewed it as a limitation rather than an asset. I understand you're curious about the transition process. Let me walk you through what we have planned for Bloom Digital. He gestured to a presentation already loaded on his laptop screen. The first slide read, Bloom Digital Integration Strategy, Phase 1. My stomach dropped as he clicked through slides detailing the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built. Client contracts would be transferred to Martinez's existing account managers. My 4 contractors would be offered positions at 60% of their current rates or released entirely. The Bloom Digital brand would be dissolved within 90 days, with all intellectual property absorbed into the Martinez portfolio. Your content strategies were quite innovative, Carlos continued, clicking to a slide analyzing my most successful campaigns. We'll definitely be incorporating those methodologies into our standard service offerings. The social media templates you developed for the restaurant sector alone are worth the acquisition price. He was talking about my work like it was a commodity, discussing my creative breakthroughs as if they were factory equipment being repurposed for maximum efficiency. What about my team? I asked, thinking about Jessica Williams, my lead strategist who'd been with me since year 2, and David Martinez, my content creator who'd turned down bigger agencies to grow with Bloom. They're not just employees. They're the heart of what made this company successful. Carlos's expression softened with what I was learning to recognize as his version of compassion. Change is always difficult, Sarah. But sentiment doesn't scale. Your team members who demonstrate value will have opportunities within our structure. Those who don't adapt will be free to pursue other options. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Jessica had a 2-year-old daughter and a mortgage. David was supporting his elderly parents while building his portfolio. Rachel Thompson, my newest hire, had just graduated from UT and was counting on this job to start paying her student loans. To Carlos, they were line items on a budget sheet. To me, they were people whose lives my family had just upended for Michael's restaurant money. I'd like to review the purchase agreement, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There must be some provision for the original owner's involvement or approval. Carlos's laugh was brief and dismissive. I'm afraid that's not how acquisitions work. Chen Holdings had full authority to execute the sale. Your father was very clear about the decision-making structure when we negotiated terms. He pulled up another document on his screen, and I recognized my father's signature on multiple pages of legal text I'd never seen before. Robert was quite thorough in ensuring all ownership questions were resolved before we moved forward. Smart businessman, your father. He understood that emotional attachments can complicate otherwise straightforward transactions. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes, with Carlos walking me through integration timelines and offering me a consulting position at half my previous income to ease the transition. He presented it as generosity, an opportunity to stay connected to my former company while learning how real businesses operate at scale. The condescension was so thick I could barely breathe. As I left his office, I realized the full scope of what my family had orchestrated. This wasn't just about taking my company to fund Michael's latest scheme. It was about proving their point, demonstrating once and for all that I was incapable of running a real business, that my success had been temporary and my failure inevitable. They'd handed my life's work to a man who saw it as spare parts, ensuring that nothing of what I'd built would survive intact. I sat in my car in the parking garage for nearly an hour, scrolling through text from my team members who were getting official termination notices via email. Jessica's message was the worst. Sarah, what's happening? They're saying Bloom is being dissolved and offering me a part-time position with no benefits. I can't afford to take a 60% pay cut. Do you know what's going on? I called my father again. This time he answered, his voice cheerful like he was calling to wish me happy birthday. Sarah, how did your meeting with Carlos go? I hope you're excited about this opportunity. Martinez Consulting has quite a reputation in the industry. The casual way he asked about my meeting with the man who'd just destroyed my career was breathtaking in its insensitivity. Dad, he's planning to eliminate everything. My team, my brand, my strategies. He's not preserving what I built. He's strip mining it for parts. Robert's sigh was heavy with the patience of a parent explaining basic facts to a confused child. Sweetheart, that's how business works. Redundancy gets eliminated. Efficiency gets maximized. You're too emotionally attached to see the bigger picture. The bigger picture. As if watching 4 people lose their livelihoods and 5 years of innovation disappear was simply a matter of perspective. This was my company, Dad. You had no right to sell it without telling me. His tone shifted, becoming firmer, more paternal. I had every right. I was protecting you from making worse decisions down the line. Women get too emotionally invested in their projects. They can't see when it's time to cut losses and move on. The conversation ended with him inviting me to Sunday dinner to celebrate Michael's new venture and discuss your next steps. As if watching my brother spend my money while my team scrambled for new jobs was something worth celebrating. I hung up and sat in the parking garage, finally understanding that my family hadn't just stolen my business. They'd been planning this humiliation for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to prove that their daughter's success was always temporary, always subject to their approval, always conditional on their tolerance for her ambition. Sunday dinner at the Chen family home had always been a command performance, but walking through the front door that evening felt like entering enemy territory. The smell of my mother's pot roast, usually comforting, now seemed calculated to remind me of childhood dependence and family hierarchy. Linda greeted me with the same enthusiasm she'd shown when I graduated college, as if the systematic destruction of my career was just another milestone worth celebrating. "There's our successful businesswoman," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a trap. "I'm so proud of how maturely you're handling this transition. It shows real growth." The kitchen buzzed with preparation for what was clearly meant to be a celebration dinner. Expensive wine sat breathing on the counter, the good china was set for 5, and a chocolate cake dominated the center island with "Congratulations, Michael," written in blue frosting. Michael emerged from the living room wearing a new shirt that probably cost more than my former employees made in a day. His smile was different from the usual sibling smugness I'd grown accustomed to over the years. This was the smile of someone who'd finally won something he'd been competing for his entire life. "Sarah!" Perfect timing. Dad's just been showing me the financial projections for the steakhouse. The numbers are incredible. He launched into an animated description of his restaurant concept, apparently oblivious to the fact that every dollar he was spending had been extracted from my life's work. "We're calling it Prime Austin. High-end steakhouse with a local twist. Dad thinks we can franchise it within 3 years if the flagship location performs well." The casual way he discussed expansion plans using money stolen from my company was breathtaking. Robert appeared from his home office, carrying a folder thick with documents and wearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd just solved a complex problem. "Sarah, good. I was hoping we could discuss your future tonight." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I've been making some calls, and I have several opportunities that might interest you." He gestured toward the dining room as if we were about to negotiate a promotion instead of discussing the wreckage of my career. Dinner conversation revolved around Michael's restaurant plans, with the kind of detailed attention my parents had never shown my business achievements. They discussed location scouting, menu development, staffing strategies, and marketing budgets, with an expertise they'd never demonstrated when I tried to share my agency milestones. Every suggestion was met with encouragement, every concern addressed with solutions, every dream treated as a realistic business plan. "The beauty of the restaurant industry," Linda said, refilling Michael's wine glass for the 3rd time, "is that it's tangible. People understand food. They can see the value immediately. Not like those internet things that are so hard to explain." Her dismissive wave in my direction made it clear which internet thing she was referencing. "Exactly," Robert agreed, cutting into his steak with the precision of a surgeon. "Michael's business model is straightforward. Classic American cuisine, quality ingredients, consistent execution. None of this social media marketing confusion that changes every month. Restaurants have been successful for centuries because they solve a basic human need." I sat there listening to them discuss business fundamentals, as if I hadn't spent 5 years building a company from 0 revenue to multiple 6 figures. As if my client retention rate wasn't higher than most traditional agencies. As if the marketing strategies they were dismissing hadn't generated millions in revenue for the local businesses I'd served. They spoke about Michael's unproven restaurant concept, with more respect than they'd ever shown my documented track record. "The location we're considering is in the warehouse district," Michael continued, clearly rehearsing a pitch he'd perfected over the past few days. "High foot traffic, affluent demographic, limited direct competition in the premium steakhouse category. Dad's already run the demographic analysis, and the numbers support a 200-seat capacity with average ticket prices between $60 and $80 per person." The conversation continued with detailed discussions of profit margins, inventory management, and staffing costs. Robert pulled out spreadsheets he'd prepared, complete with 5-year projections and break-even analysis. The level of preparation was stunning. especially considering he'd never shown this kind of analytical support for any of my business decisions. When I'd asked for his advice on expansion strategies, he'd told me to, quote, focus on the creative stuff and let the numbers work themselves out. What about Sarah's team? I finally interrupted, unable to listen to another minute of celebration while Jessica, David, and Rachel faced unemployment. The people who lost their jobs because of this sale. Are they just collateral damage for Michael's steakhouse dreams? The table went quiet, and I watched my family exchange looks that confirmed they'd discussed this exact scenario. Linda reached across the table to pat my hand with the condescending gentleness reserved for children who didn't understand grown-up decisions. Sweetheart, those people will find other jobs. That's how the market works. But this opportunity for Michael is once in a lifetime. Family has to come first, and sometimes that means making difficult choices. They were my family too, I said, thinking about the late nights Jessica and I had spent perfecting pitch presentations, the creative sessions where David had turned my half-formed ideas into brilliant campaigns, the excitement in Rachel's voice when she'd landed her first major client. We built something together. They trusted me to protect what we'd created. Robert's expression hardened with the impatience of a businessman tired of emotional objections to logical decisions. Sarah, you're thinking like an employee instead of an owner. Those people worked for a company that belonged to Chen Holdings. Their loyalty was to a paycheck, not to you personally. Successful business leaders understand the difference between professional relationships and personal attachments. The lecture continued, with Robert explaining market realities, competitive pressures, and the necessity of making tough decisions for the greater good of the family's financial interests. He spoke about my former team like they were interchangeable resources, easily replaced and quickly forgotten. The same team whose innovation had built the reputation that made my company attractive to Carlos Martinez in the first place. Besides, Michael added, apparently feeling generous enough to acknowledge my contribution, your marketing ideas were pretty good. We'll probably use some of them for Prime Austin's social media strategy, so in a way, your work lives on. The casual appropriation of my intellectual property, delivered as if he were doing me a favor, was the final insult of an evening designed to celebrate my professional destruction. As dessert was served and toasts were made to Michael's future success, I realized this dinner was more than a celebration. It was a demonstration of power, a reminder of hierarchy, and a warning about what happened when family members forgot their place. They weren't just stealing my business. They were rewriting the narrative, transforming my entrepreneurial success into evidence of my naive overreach and their necessary intervention. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion, but really needing to escape before I said something that would give away the fury building inside me. As I hugged my parents goodbye, Robert whispered in my ear with what he probably thought was paternal wisdom. This is for the best, sweetheart. Now you can focus on finding a nice, stable job and maybe settling down. Leave the business ownership to people who understand what it really takes. Walking to my car, I heard Michael's laughter echoing from the dining room, probably sharing another expansion idea funded by my stolen dreams. But instead of devastation, I felt something else crystallizing inside me. Clarity, purpose, and a determination to show my family exactly what kind of businesswoman they'd underestimated. The drive home from Cedar Park gave me 40 minutes to think, and by the time I pulled into my apartment complex, memories were surfacing that I'd spent years trying to forget. This wasn't the first time my family had sabotaged my success. It was just the first time the stakes had been high enough for me to finally recognize the pattern that had been destroying my confidence since childhood. I was 8 years old when I won the school science fair with a project about solar energy that had taken me 3 months to research and build. My exhibit was elaborate, complete with working solar panels I'd convinced a local electrician to help me construct. The night before the fair, I found my project dismantled in the garage, supposedly damaged when Michael accidentally knocked it over while playing basketball. There hadn't been time to rebuild it, so I'd watched the blue ribbon go to Kevin Morrison's volcano that erupted with baking soda and vinegar. These things happen, my mother had said, hugging me while I cried. Maybe next year you can do something simpler that won't break so easily. Michael had gotten a new basketball hoop that weekend, installed in the exact spot where my solar panel project had been destroyed. At 15, I'd been accepted to a prestigious summer program for young entrepreneurs at UT Austin. The application process had taken months, including essays, interviews, and a detailed business plan for a tutoring service I wanted to start. 2 weeks before the program began, my parents discovered they'd never submitted my deposit check, claiming they'd forgotten, and the program was now full with a waiting list of 50 students. These fancy programs are overrated anyway, Robert had explained while we grilled hamburgers in the backyard. Real business skills come from experience, not classrooms. Besides, you need to focus on your grades if you want to get into a good college. That same summer, they paid for Michael to attend an expensive baseball camp, despite his mediocre performance on the high school team. College brought a brief reprieve since I was finally free to pursue my goals without family interference. I'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration and a minor in digital marketing. Achievements that earned polite congratulations and immediate suggestions that I consider teaching instead of entrepreneurship. Education is such a stable field for women, Linda had said during my graduation dinner. You could have summers off and good benefits. Perfect for when you start a family. But the pattern had continued in subtler ways throughout my 20s. Every job promotion was met with warnings about increased stress and work-life balance. Every new relationship was scrutinized for signs that my career ambitions were threatening my romantic prospects. When I'd started dating David Martinez, my content creator, the family concerns had intensified exponentially. Dating employees is never wise, Robert had warned during one of our monthly coffee meetings. It compromises your authority and creates liability issues. Successful business owners maintain professional boundaries. The irony of receiving management advice from a man planning to steal my company wasn't lost on me, even though I hadn't understood his true intentions at the time. The most painful memory surfaced as I sat in my apartment that night, scrolling through old photos on my phone. 3 years ago, when Bloom Digital had landed its first major corporate client, a regional restaurant chain that wanted to overhaul their entire social media presence. The contract was worth $60,000, more money than I'd ever seen in a single agreement, and it validated everything I'd been building toward. I'd called my parents immediately, practically vibrating with excitement as I shared the news. Their response had been lukewarm congratulations, followed by detailed questions about the client's financial stability, contract terms, and my ability to deliver on such an ambitious project. It sounds like a lot of pressure, Linda had said. Are you sure you're ready for something this big? What happens if you can't meet their expectations? Instead of celebrating my breakthrough, they'd spent an hour listing potential problems and suggesting I might want to partner with a more experienced agency to share the risk. There's no shame in knowing your limitations, Robert had concluded. Smart business people understand when to ask for help. I'd hung up feeling deflated instead of triumphant, second-guessing a victory I'd earned through months of strategic networking and careful proposal development. That same week, Michael had announced his intention to open a food truck, his third failed business venture after the unsuccessful lawn care service and the abandoned dropshipping operation. Our parents had responded with immediate enthusiasm, offering to co-sign loans and providing seed money for equipment purchases. Food trucks are so trendy right now, Linda had gushed, and Michael has such great instincts for what people want. The food truck had lasted 6 months before Michael lost interest and moved on to day trading with money borrowed from our father's business account. The truck sat in their driveway for 2 years before they finally sold it at a loss, but the financial failure hadn't diminished their faith in his entrepreneurial potential. If anything, it had reinforced their belief that business ownership required a certain type of person, someone willing to take big risks and bounce back from setbacks with renewed determination. Someone like Michael, apparently. Someone unlike me, whose calculated approach and steady growth were somehow evidence of timidity rather than strategy. My success had been dismissed as luck or accident, while his failures were reframed as learning experiences and necessary steps toward eventual triumph. The double standard was so consistent I'd started to internalize it, wondering if maybe I really was too cautious, too small thinking, too fundamentally different from the kind of person who built lasting business empires. But sitting in my apartment that night, surrounded by awards and client testimonials that told the story of 5 years spent building something real and valuable, I finally understood the truth. My family hadn't been protecting me from business risks or career disappointments. They'd been protecting themselves from the implications of my success, from the uncomfortable reality that their assumptions about gender and capability might be wrong. My achievements threatened their worldview, challenged their understanding of family hierarchy, and forced them to confront the possibility that they'd been wrong about me from the beginning. So they'd systematically undermined my confidence, questioned my decisions, and minimized my victories until I'd started doubting myself as much as they doubted me. The business sale wasn't an intervention or a rescue operation. It was the culmination of a decades-long campaign to prove that my success had always been temporary, always dependent on their tolerance, always subject to their ultimate authority. They'd waited until I'd built something truly valuable before destroying it, ensuring maximum impact and complete humiliation. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision that would have terrified the 8-year-old girl whose science project had been destroyed, and the 15-year-old whose dreams had been derailed by a forgotten deposit check. I was done accepting their narrative about my limitations. I was done questioning my own capabilities because they couldn't accept my competence. And I was definitely done allowing them to profit from the systematic destruction of everything I'd worked to build. They thought they'd eliminated a competitor and secured funding for their preferred child's venture. What they'd actually done was create an enemy who understood exactly how dangerous underestimation could be when wielded by someone they'd trained to be patient, strategic, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. Monday morning arrived with the kind of Austin sunshine that made everything seem possible, and I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. While my family celebrated their victory and Carlos Martinez began dismantling my company, I was about to remind everyone why you should never underestimate someone who spent decades learning to fight smarter instead of louder. The first call I made was to Amanda Rodriguez, the employment lawyer I'd met at a networking event 6 months earlier. "Sarah, I heard about the Martinez acquisition through the grapevine. I'm so sorry. How are you holding up?" Her voice carried the kind of professional sympathy that suggested she'd handled similar situations before, which gave me hope that my instincts about Chen Holdings' legal vulnerabilities might be correct. "Amanda, I need to understand something about corporate structure and fiduciary duty. If someone creates a holding company for tax purposes but maintains that the subsidiary owner retains operational control, what happens when they sell that subsidiary without the operator's knowledge or consent?" The silence on the other end told me she was already connecting the legal dots that my father had apparently missed in his eagerness to fund Michael's restaurant dreams. We met that afternoon at her downtown office, where I spread out every document I'd signed over the past 3 years. The Chen Holdings formation papers, the business insurance applications, the tax filings, and most importantly, the operating agreement that my father had assured me was just paperwork, but I'd insisted on reading despite his impatience. Amanda's expression grew more serious with each page she reviewed. "Sarah, this is either criminal fraud or the most incompetent legal work I've seen in 15 years of practice. Your father had you sign documents establishing yourself as the managing member with full operational authority, but then he executed a sale agreement claiming sole ownership rights. These two sets of documents directly contradict each other." She pulled out a highlighter and began marking specific clauses that proved my father had violated his own corporate structure. While Amanda built the legal case that would unravel the sale, I focused on the business intelligence I'd been gathering about Martinez Consulting for the past 72 hours. Carlos Martinez was successful, but his success came with a pattern of ethical shortcuts that I was confident would interest the Texas Business Ethics Board, especially when combined with documentation of how he'd acquired my company. The key breakthrough came when I discovered that Martinez Consulting had been operating under a suspended business license for the past 4 months due to unpaid regulatory fees. Every contract they'd signed during that period, including the purchase of Bloom Digital, was potentially invalid under Texas business law. Carlos had been so focused on expansion that he'd neglected basic compliance requirements, creating a vulnerability that a more thorough due diligence process would have caught. But my father, in his rush to complete the sale and fund Michael's venture, had skipped the professional legal review that any competent business owner would have insisted upon. His eagerness to prove that women couldn't handle complex business decisions had led him to make the exact kind of amateur mistake he'd spent years warning me about. By Wednesday, Amanda had filed preliminary injunctions challenging the sale on multiple grounds, while I had submitted detailed complaints to 3 different regulatory agencies documenting Martinez Consulting's compliance failures. The combination of legal and regulatory pressure created exactly the kind of public scrutiny that corporate acquirers desperately wanted to avoid. Carlos Martinez called me Thursday morning, his polished confidence replaced by the strained voice of a man watching a simple acquisition transform into a legal nightmare. "Sarah, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the ownership structure of your former company. Would you be interested in discussing a resolution that works for everyone involved?" The resolution we negotiated over the next week was everything my family's greed had made possible. Martinez Consulting agreed to reverse the acquisition and pay substantial damages for the business disruption. But more importantly, the legal investigation had uncovered irregularities in my father's corporate filings that triggered automatic audits of all Chen Holdings transactions dating back 5 years. Those audits revealed a pattern of financial manipulation that made the business sale look like a minor ethical lapse. Robert Chen had been using the holding company structure to hide income from his construction business, manipulate tax obligations, and create artificial losses that reduced his overall tax burden by hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past decade. The IRS tends to take a dim view of such creative accounting strategies. While the federal investigation proceeded, I rebuilt Bloom Digital with the settlement money and the team members who'd remained loyal despite the chaos. Jessica Williams became my business partner with a 20% equity stake. David Martinez accepted the role of creative director with stock options that would make him wealthy when we eventually sold to a legitimate buyer. Rachel Thompson chose to stay as our lead account manager, bringing 3 major clients who'd followed her from other agencies. Michael's restaurant dreams collapsed when the family assets were frozen during the federal investigation. Prime Austin never opened. The deposit on the warehouse district location was forfeited, and the equipment he'd already purchased was seized as proceeds from potentially fraudulent activity. He moved back into our parents' basement, which was ironic since that basement was now owned by the federal government pending resolution of the tax evasion charges. My parents' marriage didn't survive the financial stress and public humiliation of the criminal investigation. Linda filed for divorce 6 months after the charges were announced, claiming she'd been unaware of Robert's illegal activities and seeking to protect her assets from federal seizure. The divorce proceedings revealed decades of hidden accounts, manipulated business records, and systematic financial deception that destroyed any remaining credibility they might have claimed. Robert Chen ultimately accepted a plea agreement that included 3 years in federal prison, full restitution of evaded taxes with penalties, and permanent disbarment from operating any business entity in Texas. The man who'd lectured me about business ethics and financial responsibility would spend his retirement explaining to federal probation officers how a construction contractor from Cedar Park had thought he could outsmart the entire United States tax system. The most satisfying moment came 18 months later when I received an invitation to speak at the Austin Women in Business Conference about overcoming family betrayal and building successful enterprises despite systemic undermining. The event was held at the same downtown hotel where Carlos Martinez had once explained how sentiment doesn't scale and emotional attachments complicate business decisions. My presentation focused on the importance of documentation, legal protection, and understanding that the people most likely to sabotage your success are often the ones who claim to love you most. I shared the story of Bloom Digital's destruction and resurrection without naming names, but everyone in the audience understood the implications of family members who mistake their daughter's success for their son's opportunities. After the presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes and a business plan her father had dismissed as unrealistic for someone like her. I gave her Amanda Rodriguez's business card and my personal promise that being underestimated was only a disadvantage if you let it remain one. The look of determination in her eyes reminded me of the 8-year-old girl whose science project had been destroyed, and the 15-year-old whose dreams had been derailed by a forgotten deposit check. They'd thought they were teaching me that women couldn't run businesses, that family loyalty meant accepting their judgment about my limitations, and that success required their permission and approval. What they'd actually taught me was that underestimation could be the most powerful business advantage in the world, when wielded by someone patient enough to wait for the perfect moment to prove them catastrophically wrong. Bloom Digital now generates over $2 million in annual revenue with offices in Austin, Dallas, and Houston. We employ 37 people full-time, and have a client retention rate that makes competitors study our methodologies. The company is worth approximately 15 times what Carlos Martinez had paid for it, and we've received acquisition offers from firms that actually understand the value of ethical business practices and sustainable growth. I've never spoken to my parents since the day the federal agents arrived at their house with search warrants and seized boxes of financial records that detailed decades of tax evasion and corporate fraud. Michael sends me LinkedIn requests every few months, which I decline without comment. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, especially when you've used the wreckage to construct something far more valuable. The last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in Round Rock, selling sedans to suburban families, and probably telling customers about the restaurant empire he would have built if the government hadn't unfairly targeted his family's legitimate business activities. I'm sure he still believes that women can't run real businesses, despite the mounting evidence that this particular woman had run circles around every man in her family while they were busy underestimating her. Sometimes I drive past the house in Cedar Park where I grew up, where family dinners had been exercises in hierarchy and control, where my achievements had been dismissed and my brother's failures had been reframed as learning experiences. The house belongs to a young family now, people who probably have no idea that their dining room was once the site of celebrations funded by stolen dreams and systematic betrayal. But I don't stop or slow down when I pass that house. I have meetings to attend, clients to serve, and a business empire to build, with people who've never once suggested that my success was temporary, my competence was questionable, or my ambitions were inappropriate for someone like me. They thought they were teaching me about limitations. Instead, they taught me that the only limits that matter are the ones you accept, and I've spent the last 3 years proving that I don't accept any. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.